Facebook S1 filing. Tomio, what did we learn today from the filing?
Yeah, well, it's finally here, and we learned that they're going to have a $5 billion offering on the public markets. We don't know which exchange yet. And
we do know it's FB with the stock symbol.
Right, not Face or Zuck or
like.
Or
right,
I think someone Twittered me and said creep, C-R-E-P. That was a suggestion.
No, that one didn't fly.
That's a long shot.
Yeah.
So it's going to be FB. It's going to be a $5 billion offering, which is less than some people had speculated. Right. Although in the last few days it's come back to $5 billion. And one thing that struck me looking at the offering is how little there was in terms of top line surprises. The financials were pretty much what had been telegraphed.
Right.
The underwriters were the people we had telegraphed. Morgan Stanley is the lead underwriter. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Were there other things that you found surprising in the file?
I guess the main thing for me was the connection with Zynga, and there was basically a line where Facebook said that their largest customer is Zynga, and 12% of their revenue actually comes from Zynga's directly from Zynga, either Zynga buying ads or games that Zynga games, and so that's pretty.
That's a larger dependence on Zynga than I think most people would have guessed.
Yeah. And it didn't exist the year before because it said that there was no 10%, no one above 10% last year. So that dependence increased.
Right. None of their customers provided 10% of the revenue.
Until 2010. So,
yeah. So that's growth in Zynga.
Yeah.
The evidence is the growth in Zynga.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, what did we learn about who's getting rich here?
Well, we didn't learn a lot because really what it came down to was they didn't say anybody who's selling, right? We don't know who's selling yet.
But there was one indication actually in a footnote that suggested that Zuckerberg is going to sell some shares to cover a tax liability to exercise options on 120 million shares. But again, no details there, and no details on anybody else's insiders.
Right, and also the other thing is it didn't give much. It said what percent of voting power, voting capital they had, not total capital, which is not.
There's a subtlety.
Yeah, there's a subtlety there.
So we should talk about that for a second. There's two classes of stock. There's a Class A stock and a Class B stock. The Class B stock has 10 votes per share. Class A has 1. If you want to sell the Class B shares, they translate into Class A. So from an economic interest, they're the same. Where they matter is that the Class B shares allow Zuckerberg and other insiders to control the company. And the way that the shares are structured going into the IPO, not counting the IPO shares that will get sold, most of the stock is in Class B shares. It's mostly in the super voting shares. So the Class A shares are not going to have a whole lot of say in the way that the company is run. Talk a little bit about, so how much does Zuckerberg control? And there's this thing, this voting proxy.
Yeah, so he's got 28.2% that he controls, and then because he's got this agreement with Sean Parker and Pete, can you help me on who? Moskovitz
and Jim Breyer,
and then
Partners, and a whole bunch of others.
So he can vote their shares, right? So when you add up their shares on top of his voting power, it's, what is it, like, I don't know, some huge percent.
It's 56% of the vote.
It's a huge amount of control for Zuckerberg, which is interesting because in the book, The Facebook Effect by David Kirkpatrick, there's a lot of discussion in there about Mark trying to figure out how not to lose control of his company and what he learned from Sean Parker about how Sean did lose control of companies he'd been involved in and how he wanted to teach Zuckerberg not to make the same mistakes he did. So clearly lesson learned there.
So let's touch on a couple of other things. Is Sheryl Sandberg a billionaire?
So George Andrews did a really interesting post on this. I don't the way that we value, she's not a billionaire yet, and but she does have a whole bunch of, I think it's 39 million shares that are options that have not vested yet. Right. So when Forbes puts net worth numbers on people, we do not count unvested options toward their net worth. So it's only once the options vest, and if we have some information on the strike price, we need a little more. We need a little more detail than we've got. She could be a billionaire someday. It just depends on at what rate those
Right.
those.
And that day may not be more than a couple of years.
Yeah,
away.
it may come
close.
soon. So it all depends. She could be one of the billionaires. We've never really known. I mean, that's been a big question, right? How much does she own of the company?
Right.
Because she came in later than the co-founders and a lot of the early investors, and so we assume she didn't own that much. And but they're rewarding her. I mean, the other interesting thing was the pay, right? How much money she made.
Yes, so there's detail on executive compensation in the filing. Zuckerberg actually made relatively less cash compensation than some of the other executives. I think including the stock options that Sheryl received in 2011, she made basically like $30 billion last year. One other note along those lines is that there's a line that says Zuckerberg's base pay is currently $500,000 a year, but effective 2013, he'll take home $1 a year. So he's already done enough.
Right out of the Steve Jobs playbook.
Right out of the Steve Jobs playbook.
Yeah, I only need $1. I can just sell shares next year to pay for whatever I need.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'll ever have a dividend in Facebook or not.
Well, they say in the filing that don't expect to see a dividend, but forever's a long time. Apple's still not paying them. Maybe
Right.
they'll beat Apple tomorrow.
Yeah, who knows. But in terms of other people, I mean, it was interesting who was listed as a principal and selling shareholder. Eduardo Saverin did not show up on that list, and he is one of our Facebook billionaires, co-founder. So I'm assuming that means he owns less than 5%. Peter Thiel did show up. Reid Hoffman did not show up. Wasn't expecting Reid to show up because he owns a small percent. He was an early investor. Mark Pincus also was an early investor.
Right.
They have very, very small stakes.
Justin Moskowitz.
And Justin Moskowitz was there.
Jim Breyer was there.
And Jim Breyer was there because of
Right.
mostly because of probably his Excel. I mean, he owns a little bit of his own.
And Yuri Milner.
was there.
TST.
Yeah. Right. Oh, right. We forgot to include Yuri Milner on that post.
So we'll see more as in the weeks to come as we get more detail. I think that the one thing I would leave it with is to think a little bit about valuation here. The numbers work very nicely. They made exactly $1 billion in profit in 2011. If you believe that the chatter that this is going to be a company with a $100 billion valuation, while you've got a company trading at 100 times earnings, we'll see if the market's willing to do that. I don't know.